This 2024 offseason will always be remembered as the summer wherein the NBA introduced the second apron. This new rule caused the LA Clippers to let Paul George walk away in free agency for free. It also played a significant role in the breakup of Golden State's Big Three, and it even compelled LeBron James to accept his first below-max salary in 10 years. Basically, the entire NBA is reorienting itself around this new rule, which stemmed out from the implementation of the new CBA last offseason. Well, sure, even before the introduction of the new CBA, the league has always taken steps to ensure parity and balance among teams. They enforced luxury tax penalties, which aim to punish teams that spend too far over the salary cap. And there were also repeater tax penalties, which were designed to punish teams who exceeded the tax threshold 3 times over a 4-year period. However, contending teams who were able to spend a ton of cash were just basically willing to live with those penalties in order to build loaded rosters. But now, everything changes with the creation of the second apron. There's a reason even big market teams like the Warriors, Clippers, and Lakers tried their best to duck the second apron this summer. Well, for the upcoming 2024 to 2025 season, a team is considered to fall under the second apron once their payroll reaches at least $18 million above the tax threshold. And these second apron teams are basically bound to face harsh penalties and restrictions in terms of roster building. First, in the trade market, second apron teams can't send out multiple players in a single trade. They can't send out cash in any player deal, and they also can't sign and trade their own players. Also, in free agency, second apron teams can't use their mid-level exemption to sign players even in the buyout market. But what's even crazier is, once a team falls under the second apron in a certain season, their first-round draft pick 7 years in the future actually gets frozen and can no longer be used or traded, unless that team goes under the second apron 3 times over a 4-year period. While entering the 2025 season, the Phoenix Suns, Minnesota Timberwolves, Boston Celtics, and Milwaukee Bucks are the only 4 teams to fall under the second apron, and out of those 4, Boston and Minnesota look the most primed to contend multiple times over the next few years, with them having multiple core players in their prime. The problem is, those cores were built before the new apron rules were implemented, meaning both Boston and Minnesota weren't really able to prepare for these changes. Only time will tell until when can the Celtics pay both Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, or until when can Minnesota keep Cat, Anthony Edwards, and Rudy Gobert together before all those second apron restrictions start to really hurt them. Those teams might have a 2 to 3 year window to go all in before the second apron forces their cores to break up. But then, a couple of the NBA's younger teams who are watching all of this unfold even before their cap sheets get expensive have been able to plan ahead a bit more effectively. And those are the OKC Thunder and the San Antonio Spurs, who are also pretty much trying to get around these new restrictions in quite a similar manner. So what's good everyone, it's Real Balls here, and for the rest of this video, let's talk about how OKC and San Antonio are attempting to set the blueprint for success in the era of the NBA's second apron. So let's get to it. Among these 2 young teams, OKC is a bit further ahead of their winning timeline, but the basic principle applies to San Antonio as well. Both teams have a player who's expected to compete for multiple MVP awards down the line, Victor Wembanyama for San Antonio and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for OKC. The Thunder have 2 other young potential stars in Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams, and while the Spurs are still looking for core star pieces next to Wembanyama, they already have some options in Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, and Jeremy Sochan. Plus, both teams have also added veterans on short-term deals this summer. Alex Caruso and Chris Paul both have 1 year left on their contracts, Isaiah Hartenstein has 2 years guaranteed on his deal with OKC, and Harrison Barnes has also 2 years left from his deal in Sacramento. But most notably, both the Thunder and Spurs have deep stocks of future draft picks from other teams. But the thing is, that was already true even before the introduction of the new CBA. But since the second apron was introduced, what changed though for both teams were the kinds of picks that they were targeting. Both the Spurs and Thunder have been more aggressive in terms of trying to acquire pick swaps. Well, since the beginning of the 2023 offseason, which was the first transactional cycle to follow the introduction of the second apron, there have been a total of 20 first-round picks over the next 7 drafts that are owed as pick swaps to other teams. And 45% of those pick swaps are owed to either OKC or San Antonio. Specifically, 4 belong to the Thunder and 5 belong to the Spurs. Well, looking at it, OKC's pick swaps are bound to come sooner. They have rights to swap first-round picks each year from 2025 to 2028. Meanwhile, the Spurs pick swaps come a little bit later, with the first one coming in 2026 and the last of those coming in 2031. These timelines make sense because of the team's slightly different situations. The Thunder are obviously trying to win now, while the Spurs have yet to enter the playoffs in the Victor Wembanyama era. But then the question is, why are OKC and San Antonio intentionally targeting pick swaps? Well, I think the most obvious reason would be that teams in general tend to be more open and more flexible in terms of trading unprotected or lightly protected first-round pick swaps than straight-up trading first-round picks. But then another reason would be that both OKC and San Antonio are expected to be very good for a long time, meaning their own picks are not expected to land high in the draft. But acquiring pick swaps allow them to find value out of other teams' picks, because even assuming that a team who owes them a pick swap is competitive as well, there's still potential value in, say, jumping from number 28 to number 23 in the draft. And most especially, there's the fact that there's no potential downside for both the Thunder and Spurs in acquiring those pick swaps. They can always use them if they need it, but they don't need to use it if they don't want to. But then another question is, how do these pick swaps all relate to the second apron in the bigger picture? Well, think about where OKC will be in 2028 when the last of their pick swaps come their way. By that time, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander will be 30 years old on a really expensive supermax deal, Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren will be in their mid-20s on what we can assume to be max rookie extensions, while all of the current cheap rookie deals of their other players, including that of Cason Wallace and Nikola Topic, would have expired, meaning OKC's entire roster will be earning at the market rate. On the other hand, for the Spurs, by the time their final pick swap comes around in 2031, Wembanyama will enter his age 28 season on what we can assume to be an even more expensive supermax, while all of his teammates' rookie deals will also have been replaced by market rate contracts. Basically, OKC and San Antonio have their pick swaps coming in right at the primes of their respective cores, and at that point, keeping all their talent together will not be financially feasible under the rules of the second apron, and this will be the time when the Thunder and Spurs need young and cheap talent the most. This is when their pick swaps could play an important role for both teams. In the year 2028, OKC owns a right to swap first-round picks with the Dallas Mavericks, and by that time, Kyrie Irving will be 36, but Luka Doncic would have probably signed a new contract and Dallas would still probably be good. But there's still a potential downside for the Mavs that OKC can capitalize on. Same goes for San Antonio in 2031, when they own rights to swap picks with Sacramento. By that time, the Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis will be in their mid-30s, DeMar DeRozan would probably be retired, and basically, Sacramento is just a historically safe team to bet against. But then, even if both Dallas and Sacramento are still good by the time those pick swaps are up, it wouldn't really hurt OKC and San Antonio, just because of the fact that both teams have just accumulated a ton of those pick swaps. Not all of those would hit, but just one of those can definitely change everything, especially for a small market team. The San Antonio Spurs know this very well, as in 2011, their number 1 seeded team got upset by the number 8 seed Memphis Grizzlies in the first round of the playoffs. It looked like the Spurs dynasty was over, but then they traded George Hill for the pick that they would use to draft Kawhi Leonard that same year, which caused the Spurs to add another 6 years of contention from their core. Again, OKC and San Antonio's draft assets aren't just limited to pick swaps, as both teams also have plenty of outright picks from other teams as well. But both OKC and San Antonio know that they won't have the roster spots to continually bring in several new rookies each year as they're contending, which is why it makes more sense for them to consolidate their draft assets into a more manageable number of high upside selections, which you could have a good chance of landing via pick swaps. It seems like the ultimate goal here for the Spurs and the Thunder is to find high-level starters to eventually replace expensive core players to make sure that both Wembanyama and Gilgeous-Alexander are always surrounded by talent that both teams can actually afford to keep, in a world in which very few teams have sustainable ways of replenishing their supporting cast. And looking at it, what the Spurs and Thunder are doing could be very much relevant to the rest of the NBA. Well, for sure, it's not like every team has a Wembanyama or a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and it's not like every team has the cap space and the deep base of draft assets that OKC got from the Paul George trade and that the Spurs have collected since trading DeJounte Murray. But what if teams such as the Utah Jazz or the Brooklyn Nets get to draft their own versions of Wembanyama or SGA? Both teams have traded multiple stars the past 2 years and now have the draft capital to follow OKC and San Antonio's blueprint if they choose to. Or what if other contending teams like the 76ers or the Phoenix Suns suddenly decide to rebuild and to trade away a star player or two next offseason? Could they also proactively use the same blueprint? Well, the truth is, we really can't be sure at this point, because we obviously first have to see how this plays out for both OKC and San Antonio. But for sure, those two teams are the first ones in the NBA with a potentially replicable plan to beat the restrictions set by the second apron, just as how the Golden State Warriors sustained the dynasty by finding ways to endure penalties set by the luxury tax in the first apron. And if either OKC or San Antonio win championships using their blueprint, it's definitely going to be the standard that NBA teams are going to follow moving forward. Instead of replicating Golden State, who won by going all in and by building top-heavy rosters, teams could choose to instead create huge advantages through sustainability by trading away older stars to build foundations in the draft to be able to win. Ironically though, if the Spurs and Thunder really get to build dynasties, the next version of the CBA could be very well designed to curb teams like them, just like the past CBA has been designed to prevent teams like Golden State from disrupting balance in the NBA. And perhaps, we'll see a new rule which prohibits the swapping of first-round picks altogether. Well, we're definitely years away from predicting the future, but I think it's safe to say that out of all teams, OKC and San Antonio thus far are the most equipped to thrive against the new restrictions set by the modern NBA. So thank you guys if you've actually made it this far into the video, but do you think that the OKC Thunder or San Antonio Spurs can really succeed in the era of the NBA's second apron? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this has been Real Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.